and the government will then go on to the Social Security Legislation Rewrite Bill committee stages. So this is where the detailed piece by piece goes on. It's a big bit of legislation, very controversial, and if all goes according to plan, that'll still be being debated at 5 to 6 when the House will adjourn for the recess.
Mr. Speaker.
E te atua kaha rawa, ka tuku whakamoemiti atu, mātou mō nā ata whainā, kua waihotia mai ki runga i a mātou. Ka waiho i a mātou panga whai aru katoa, ki te taha ka mihi ki te koini, me te inoe atu mō te aurahitanga i roto i a mātou. Whakaarohanga kia moihu ai, kia whakaiti ai, tā mātou whakahaere i nā take o te whare nei, mō te oranga, te monga na rongo, me te aroha o Aotearoa. Amane.
The Honourable Chris Hipkins.
Tuesday the 12th of June. The budget debate will conclude on that day. Other business for the week will include the remaining stages of the Taxation, Neutralising Base Erosion and Profit Shifting Bill, the second readings of the Land Transport Management Regional Fuel Tax Amendment Bill, and the Exclusive Economic Zone and Continental Shelf Environmental Effects Amendment Bill. The continued committee stage of the Social Security Legislation Rewrite Bill. Wednesday will be a Members' Day, but will also include debate on the 2018 investment statement instead of the general debate.
No papers have been presented, no bills have been introduced. A petition has been delivered for the clerk for presentation.
Petition of Jonathan Mosen, requesting that the House conduct an inquiry on difficulties completing the 2018 census.
That petition stands referred to a select committee allocated by the clerk. Select committee reports have been delivered for presentation.
Report of the Health Committee on the Newborn Enrolment with General Practice Bill, and report of the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Committee on the International Treaty Examination of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership.
The bill is set down for second reading and the International Treaty Examination is set down for consideration. The House comes to oral questions. Question A, point of order, the Honourable Jerry Browning.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday we wrote to you asking you to consider some matters that were set out in the letter, the first of which was our ongoing concern about your involvement in briefing the media, suggesting that a National MP has been, or alleging that a National MP made the statement about the Prime Minister, calling her a stupid little girl. Mr. Speaker, we ask that you contact us before 2 p.m. today, the start of question time, to clear this matter up. Because quite clearly a Speaker briefing the media on a matter that is critical of the opposition, particularly when all those who could have made the statement have made it clear they did not, when many who have listened to the tapes and considered the transcript cannot find evidence of it ever being said, with the only person left who claims to have heard it being the Speaker, then we are in a position where the Speaker has taken a very strong adversarial role towards the opposition. Given the size of the opposition, that is a difficult position for any Speaker to be in. So the question that I would ask, Mr. Speaker, is did you brief the media about the allegation that a National MP called the Prime Minister a stupid little girl.
Speaking to the point of order, the Honourable Chris Hipkins.
Mr Speaker, the matters that are being raised by the Shadow Leader of the House, as Speaker's rulings make clear, are matters that should be raised with the Speaker outside of the House and not in the House. And in fact, the kind of reflections on the Chair inherent in the point of order that Mr Brownlee just raised are themselves disorderly.
Speaking further to the point of order, the Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
We sent a letter to the Speaker making it clear, after we had read in various media places that the Speaker had acknowledged that he had heard the statement. If he's the only one who heard it, it raises the question about how did the statement then get into the media. I asked on the day in this House what was the statement, and the Speaker felt that the statement calling the Prime Minister a stupid little girl was inappropriate for the House and did not repeat it. The question then is, how did it make its way to the media? And the member might like to say, well, raising this creates a degree of disorder. Let me tell you that the degree of disorder has well and truly been created by the way in which that particular statement has found its way into the media.
Speaker.
Fairly soon I'd like to come to a point of order.
Mr Speaker, if a member has raised a concern with the Speaker outside of the House, or indeed in the House, and is dissatisfied with the response to that, the only appropriate course of action is to set down a notice of motion about that matter. There are very clear Speaker's rulings about that. In fact, it is the first Speaker's ruling concerning reflections on the Chair that says that if members have a concern, they can set down a notice of motion, and that is the way to raise the matter, not through further points of order.
The House comes to oral questions. Willow Jean Prime.
Thank you.
Point of order, the Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Mr Speaker, yesterday you required the Honourable Paula Bennett to withdraw and apologise for a statement that you heard her make on the way out the door when she left the House. We've looked at the transcript, the Hansard. We've considered whether a statement could have been made by asking those relevant people nearby what it could have been. And all we're left with is a statement by the Honourable Paula Bennett that it was not worth staying and that she would leave the Parliament leave the session. And then there was a question from you asking for how long. Her reply was just for today, at which point you thanked her. When she returned to deliver her budget speech, you required her to withdraw and apologise for something that she had said. Mr Speaker, if we're going to have rules in here about what can and can't be said, what might or might not offend you, then could you tell us, please, what was the offensive word or words or construction of words that have not been recorded by Hansard?
No, I'll just deal with this one very quickly. The member made comments when she was on her feet as she was leaving. That is disorderly.
Further point of order.
A further point of order, the Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Mr Speaker, last week you, I think quite appropriately, ruled out the use of the word bribe as a descriptor for government policy. But you also then went on to say that once that is ruled out, and in the case of, it was actually yesterday a penalty given.
Well, I'm now going to interrupt the member and say that the member will resume a seat. Time has passed for that to be brought up as a point of order, and Mr Bennett, if you have more expertise, then I think you should probably advise Mr Brownlee.
A point of order, Mr Speaker.
A point of order, the Honourable Jerry Brownlee, not on the same matter.
Well, you have leapt again to a conclusion and decided to rule on your own understanding of what you thought was about to come.
I'll give the member a chance to promote something which is a proper point of order, and the member doesn't ask me questions, he raises points of order.
Is it now your ruling that the word bribe cannot be used in conjunction with a description of a government policy, but can be used as a rhetorical comment from a government minister, in this case the Prime Minister, responding to a question that had been ruled out of order?
I'm quite reluctant to get involved in something which is absolutely inappropriate to be brought up now, but that member knows that the content of questions, the contents of answers and the contents of debates are all treated in their own context and with different standards. The member has been here a long time and he knows that. Willow Jean Prime.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. What reports has he seen on the strength of the government's finances?
The Honourable Grant Robertson.
Mr. Speaker, in addition to the positive reviews from bank economists earlier this week, yesterday Moody's Investors Services said that Budget 2018 preserved New Zealand's strong public finances and underscored the government's, quote, very high fiscal strength. Moody's noted how this government was able to boost expenditure on families, health, education, housing and infrastructure while maintaining the fiscal capacity to buffer the economy from any future shocks.
Supplementary. Why is it important for the government to maintain fiscal discipline?
Mr. Speaker, it is every government's responsibility to look out for future generations whilst also making the essential investments needed now to ensure New Zealanders can access critical public services. In its report, Moody's notes that our budgetary prudence gives us significant policy flexibility to such an extent that we can fund higher spending while keeping the broad direction of fiscal policy unchanged. This comes from taking a responsible approach to debt repayment, more responsible than the previous government, by the fact we're ensuring a level tax playing field and by the fact that the government's policies will stimulate economic growth rather than just relying on the housing market and population growth to drive activity.
Supplementary. And what does Moody's say about the government's plan to invest a net $42 billion in capital over the next 5 years?
Oh, Mr. Speaker, Moody's notes that this stronger infrastructure investment, $10 billion more than the previous government had planned, will improve the supply capacity of the economy and bolster productivity in the long run. In terms of specific projects, Moody's notes that a recent pickup in new building permits points to strengthening residential construction supported by development related to KiwiBuild. They do caution about labour constraints, which highlights why our policy of free post-secondary training and education for apprentices and those undertaking trades training is so important to making our economy more productive, more sustainable and more inclusive.
Question number 2, the Honourable Paula Benner.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Does she stand by all of her government's policies and actions?
The Honourable Grant Robertson on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Jerry. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, yes.
As petrol prices rise, at what price per litre will her government reconsider their plans to hike petrol excise taxes and impose a new Auckland regional fuel tax?
Mr. Speaker, the decisions that we've made around funding future transport projects are very much in line with what previous governments have done when we've needed to see more investment. For example, between January and June 2015, petrol prices increased by 40 cents a litre, and the then Minister went ahead with an excise increase in July.
Point of order.
Yeah, well, I am going to ask the Minister to answer the question.
Mr. Speaker, it is the belief...
Order! Order! I don't need the support from the backbench down there. Grant Robertson.
Mr. Speaker, it is the belief of this government that we need to make significant investments in our transport infrastructure. We will be funding that through the National Land Transport Fund and through the levy increases associated with that, as previous governments have done.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
A point of order, the Honourable Paula Benner.
I was quite clear at what price per litre will her government reconsider their plans, and that still wasn't answered.
I think it was certainly addressed, even if the member's not satisfied with the answer.
Supplementary. As petrol prices rise, at what price per litre will her government reconsider their plans to hike petrol excise taxes?
Mr. Speaker, we have a plan to invest in transport infrastructure, funded as it normally is done through the fuel excise levy. We have no plans to change that.
How much will families' cost of living go up thanks to this government's increases to fuel excise taxes, GST on online goods, additional tax on mum and dad rental owners and the new regional fuel tax?
Mr Speaker, I don't have that information to hand, but what I do know is that under our families package, 384,000 families will be better off by $75 per week.
Is it fair for an Auckland family to pay $700 per year more to fill up their car because of this government's new taxes?
Mr Speaker, I reject the premises in the member's question. We know from MB estimates they're talking about maybe an extra $250 a year on a family. We know that for many of those families they will be far better off under the Labor-led government's families package. I would also say to the member that the issues that have arisen around transport in New Zealand didn't just happen in the last 7 months. They happened over the last 9 years.
Does she believe that prisoners who commit 3 serious violent offences should receive the maximum sentence without parole for their 3rd offence?
Mr Speaker, the 3 strikes law that the member is referring to is under consideration by this government. When it was passed, the previous government was warned that gimmicky policies like that don't actually help reduce the crime rate.
That's a good way to call it. Did her Minister of Justice take a paper to Cabinet suggesting repealing the 3 strikes regime and that the whole Cabinet, including her New Zealand First Ministers, agreed to progress the work?
Mr Speaker, I don't have that information to hand. If the member chooses to put down a question in writing, I'll be able to answer that.
So who was right then? Her Minister of Justice, who said that New Zealand First were there when Cabinet made the decision to work on repealing 3 strikes, and that, quote, it's a Cabinet decision, end quote, or her Deputy Prime Minister, who said they were, quote, yet to discuss the issue?
Mr Speaker, as I said in my previous answer, I don't have the specific details of that. What I do know is that on this side of the House, we're committed to making sure that while New Zealanders stay safe, we don't continue to fill up our prisons ever more and more. We can do better than that when it comes to justice.
A point of order, the Honourable Jerry Browning.
Mr Speaker, for consistency, why didn't you stop the member answering once he said he had no information on the question?
Thank you, Mr Browning. Is there a further question?
Supplementary then. So what percentage of the prison population are made up of gang members?
Mr Speaker, that's a matter of very specific detail. I invite the member to put the question down to the Minister of Corrections or the Minister of Justice.
So does the Prime Minister expect an increase of the number of gang members imprisoned, given her government announced 700 new police supposedly to combat gangs, and how does that reconcile with trying to lower the prison population?
Well, Mr Speaker, what that is about is a mixture of policing. We want to make sure that we have community policing that is preventing crime, and we want to make sure that we crack down on gangs. I'm really interested that the previous government's party doesn't actually seem to have a plan to reduce the prison population. On this side of the House, we don't think it works. And I remind the member of her former colleague Bill English, who said that prisons are a moral and fiscal failure. Perhaps you'd like to call him back in.
Why did Budget 2018 not provide any funding for universities in New Zealand to even keep up with inflation for the first time in 2 decades?
Mr Speaker, in this budget, the priority for this side of the House in education was early childhood education, which got the first universal funding increase in a decade, and our priority was schools. We continue to support the tertiary sector.
How many redundancies is she expecting from universities in light of them getting 0 increase in funding for the first time in over a decade?
Mr Speaker, the balance sheets of our universities are excellent. They're all in surplus bar one, and I'm sure they'll be able to continue to operate at a very high level.
Question number 3, Paul Goldsmith.
Point of order, Mr Speaker. The question that I had down has been chopped in half, and the section that how does it compare with the level of June 2017 taken out? And I just wonder what Speaker's rulings was the basis for that position.
Order. The question that the member has is the question that I approved, and it actually involved no change from the time that it left the clerk's office. So the member can't appeal now to have something changed back when I had not been involved in any discussion around the question. If the member doesn't want to ask it in its current form, that's his call. Mr Brownlee.
The point here is that there were 3 questions allowed by the clerk's office asked by government members that made similarly backward-looking recommendations. Yet when we get something that is simple as the question being asked by Mr Goldsmith, there is quite a kerfuffle about the way in which it, in fact, requiring the people lodging the question to take that part of it out. If the government is able to look retrospectively at things, we've heard plenty of that today from Mr Robertson in the last series of questions, then why can't the opposition?
Well, the government all members can ask questions which are ministers' responsibilities, which look back where they are the ministers' responsibilities. If this question had something about the business confidence in a period that was pre-government, that has no responsibility. If it was a report from a department on something that was pre-change, then there would be responsibility for that report. It is a question of the source, and as the member well knows, the ANZ Bank is not an agency of the government.
Just speaking to that point of order, could I just...
No, I have ruled on it, and it's not going to change. The member can either ask the question or he can sit down.
My question is to the Minister for Economic Development. What level is business confidence now, according to the latest ANZ Business Outlook survey?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable David Parker.
The level of business confidence now is not shown in the latest ANZ Business Outlook survey.
Supplementary. Does he accept that business confidence levels have fallen in the last 8 months?
Mr Speaker, what I know is that according to...
Order, that's too much. This supplementary question will be heard, this supplementary answer will be heard in silence, and it will be short.
Mr Speaker, I have 2 points to make. The first is from interest.co, and I quote, "The ANZ Business Confidence Survey has only 0.2% correlation with GDP growth based on leading by 3 quarters, akin to a 20% pass mark," and a comment from the ANZ's former chief economist Cameron Bagri, who recently said of these surveys, quotes, "Those surveys are very poor barometers, you should throw them out."
Does the Minister accept that investment decisions about creating new businesses, hiring new staff, buying new equipment are affected by falling levels of business confidence?
Mr Speaker, no. I know that the member thinks it's to his political advantage to talk the economy down, but there's far too much good news for that. Investments intentions are more determined by factors like rising profits in the kiwi fruit sector, increasing dairy payouts, significant trade negotiations with the EU, and a budget showing lowering unemployment, increasing growth, increasing surpluses and rising wages.
To the Minister, does he accept that businesses collectively have genuine concerns about the direction of travel indicated by the government?
Mr Speaker, I meet regularly with businesses, and one of the points businesses have made to me is that they are delighted that there is a $1 billion effective tax cut for businesses who invest in research and development over the next 4 years. One of the things that they know will arrest the decline in exports that occurred under the trickle-down theory of the last government.
Does he think his colleague Shane Jones's suggestion that firms struggling to find workers should simply invest in automation is the sort of thing that's driving down business confidence?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very supportive of bringing forward technologies that improve productivity, export competitiveness and indeed are business centres in their own right. And one of the areas that I and the Minister for Regional Development agree that the Provincial Growth Fund should be investing in is bringing forward on-farm and horticultural robotics to improve the profitability of this economy. And I would note there would be more jobs per hectare than on a dairy farm.
Supplementary, is he aware that not every business can go down to Mitre 10 and buy an equipment to automate their production, such as kiwi fruit growers?
Yes, I am, and I'm also aware that you can't yet get a robot to ask a decent primary question.
Supplementary. Does he think his colleague Ian Galloway's suggestion that firms worried about increased labour costs are just demonstrating poor resilience is the sort of thing that's driving down business confidence?
I beg your pardon, sir, I didn't hear that question. Could I ask for it to be repeated?
Well, it's sort of counting. You might as well have it.
Supplementary. Does he think his colleague Ian Galloway's suggestion that firms worried about increased labour costs are demonstrating poor resilience, and is that the sort of thing that's driving down business confidence?
Mr. Speaker, I believe that increasing labour productivity and increasing wages that follow increases in labour productivity is one of the primary ambitions of a Labour government, and it will make us a wealthier, more prosperous, cleaner and fairer society.
Question number 4, Jamie Lee Ross.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Transport and asks, does he remain committed to his proposals for new and increased fuel taxes in light of recent reports of petrol prices reaching record highs? If so, what consideration, if any, will he give to the increased cost of living his fuel tax proposals will have on New Zealand families?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Phil Twyford.
I am committed.
Order. Can I ask, Ms Bennett, can you just wait at least until the Minister's started answering before you start your interjections?
Mr. Speaker, I am committed to striking a balance between affordability and taking urgent action on the transport infrastructure deficit that we inherited. MB estimates that the changes to fuel taxes will see an average family in Auckland pay an extra $5 per week. By contrast, our government's families package will put $75 a week into the pockets of 384,000 low to middle income families. In terms of considering the impact of taxes on fuel prices, I intend to follow the same process as the Honourable Simon Bridges did in 2015.
If petrol prices continue to increase, will he revisit his proposals to increase fuel taxes, which will raise petrol prices even higher?
International oil price fluctuations have a far greater influence on petrol prices than the policy of the previous government and this government of regular, small excise increases. And as successive governments have shown, it makes no sense to make major infrastructure investment decisions based on highly volatile oil price fluctuations.
Order. I'm just going to ask Mr Hudson and Mr Smith just to turn their volume down a little bit. Maria Lubeck.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister, what reports has he seen of past governments varying the amount of fuel tax levied to match variations in the global oil prices?
None.
Is he concerned that the rising cost of petrol will increase even further if he's successful in increasing fuel taxes by up to 25 cents a litre?
Well, as I've tried to make abundantly clear to the member, the increase in fuel excise is a very, very small increase compared to oil price fluctuations. And I would point out to the member that instead of paying $400 million to the wealthiest 10%, this government's putting 75...
Is he saying that his proposals to increase fuel taxes in Auckland by up to 25 cents a litre, as he's announced, is small?
Well, what I would point out is that 25 cents is the maximum rate that was consulted on in the draft GPS. It's not necessarily the rate that we're going to settle on. It applies only in Auckland where the regional fuel tax is in place, not to the rest of the country. The reason that we are investing in our transport system is because we've inherited a legacy of an infrastructure deficit after 9 years of totally unbalanced transport policies. We're committed to doing the right thing for this country and the right thing for the economy.
Maria Lubeck, sorry, point
of order. So the question earlier was ruled out because we were referring to 2017, yet the Minister seems to be able to have make comment about the last 9 years as he wishes to, and I'm just asking for some clarification.
I have a feeling the member's trying to relitigate a ruling I made quite some time ago. I think I will ignore it. Maria Lubeck.
To the Minister. What lessons will the Minister take from past increases of fuel excise while international petrol prices were high?
Mr. Speaker, in 2015 the fuel excise was increased after petrol prices increased by 40 cents per litre. Prices later stabilised and returned to $1.70 per litre by the end of that year, 2015. I've learned from that experience that you cannot make infrastructure investment decisions based on international oil price fluctuations. They're simply too volatile. And I learned also from the former Transport Minister that those fluctuations dwarf the changes in the fuel excise.
Order. David Bennett will stand, withdraw and apologise.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
No, the member knows absolutely he interjected an unparliamentary remark in my direction during the asking of the supplementary question.
And what for? Why do I withdraw and apologise?
Sorry?
Why do I withdraw and apologise, Mr. Speaker?
Why?
Yes.
Because the member made an unparliamentary remark and it was exacerbated by the fact that it was done during the asking of a supplementary question.
Point of order. What was the unparliamentary remark?
I'm not going to repeat what the member said about me.
So,
withdraw and apologise.
Mr. Speaker, I need your explanation.
Order. The member will withdraw and apologise now, or I will take more serious action than's happened in the House for quite some time. Could you get me that? To withdraw and apologise? No, I'm not having a point of order. I'm waiting for Mr Bennett to decide whether he will comply with my instruction to withdraw and apologise for reflecting on the chair while a supplementary question was being asked. Is the member going to withdraw and apologise?
Point of order.
No, I'm not having a point of order, Mr Bennett. You're either going to withdraw and apologise or I will name you. Order.
Withdraw and apologise.
Thank you. The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Sorry, sir, but it is in reflection to me yesterday having to withdraw and apologise. I genuinely do not know what it was for. I did not make a comment as I left, and this is leading to this kind of disorder when we don't know what the actual line is as to what you find offensive and what you don't. When I've looked at Hansard, I know what I said as I left. I made no disparaging remarks about you last night, and this leaves to my colleagues in a position now where they don't know
The member will resume her seat. The member will resume her seat. If she wants an explanation for how she breached standing orders yesterday, I suggest she watches the TV, either on the Parliament TV or on at least one of the news channels, to see herself interjecting on her feet as she left.
Point of order.
Is it a new point of order, Mr Browning, or is it a
Yes.
relitigation?
No, it's a new point of order.
A new point of order, the Honourable Jerry Browning.
Mr Speaker, people might like to look at the TVNZ clip that's currently running of a member challenging the Speaker on frequent occasions and ultimately being required to leave the House and being quite messy all the way through. On none of those occasions was the member named. My question simply is, why do we go suddenly from a position where the Speaker does not want to apparently make people leave the House, does not explain what an offence might be, but then simply requires people to accept the arbitrary decision of the Chair or be named, which everyone knows is quite an extreme step for anyone in this House. It seems the step that we've gone from a very, very simple, straightforward position of how you deal with these things to one that is quite draconian. And I think that is the problem we've got with the inconsistency of the way the Chair is operating at the present time.
Well, I note the member's comments, but as the member knows well, naming is, I think, Standing Order 90 is the punishment for being grossly disorderly, and refusing to withdraw and apologise for quite an extended period of time is grossly disorderly. If it's the same matter, Ms Bennett, you're running a serious risk of losing a number of supplementary questions from your team from the first Tuesday back.
So to be clear, Mr Speaker, what I wish to be is actually not unruly in this House. So I need clarification that it was yesterday when I said it's a waste of time that you took such offence to that I had to come back and when I came back you insisted that I withdraw.
That's exactly right. And if the member had not said that she was leaving the House, I would have required her to withdraw and apologise then. But seeing she was self-banishing herself, I thought that that was the best way of dealing with it, and we could get on with business. I did reflect to the member later on that on a previous occasion when I had done exactly the same thing, made a comment as I was self-banishing, the Speaker sent for me and made me come back and apologise and then booted me out again. The member was treated pretty leniently.
Order.
No, the member will resume his seat. Her seat, sorry. Mr Bennett will withdraw and apologise again.
But talking to his colleague.
Point of order.
No, the member will withdraw and apologise.
I just want to table a withdrawal because I might as well be using it all the time the way the House is going at the moment.
So the member's declining to withdraw and apologise?
No, I'm just seeking your guidance as to why.
No, you're not seeking my guidance. You're going to withdraw and apologise.
Mr Speaker, what for? I need to know what I did wrong.
Mr Bennett, you reflected on the Chair on my ruling. Again. I mean, the member understands what he does. He's not an unintelligent member. It's not something that happens accidentally, but the member should be able to remember sort of 30 seconds after he made a comment that he did. The member will withdraw and apologise.
I withdraw and apologise, sir.
A point of order, Jerry Browning.
Mr Speaker, is the Chair immune from the provisions of Standing Order 120?
Sorry, can the member say that a little bit more loudly?
Yes, is the Chair immune from the provisions of Standing Order 120?
No.
Point of order. Then isn't simply requiring members to withdraw and apologise without some explanation of the reason for that impugning improper motives against a member?
For goodness sake. Oh, Mr. Brownlee, this has got to the point of being ridiculous. The member is Paula Bennett will leave the chamber. The member will leave the chamber. Now, I've lost where we're at. The supplementary question, David Bennett.
Okay. No, primary question.
Primary question. The Honourable David Bennett.
To the Minister of Corrections, does he stand by all his statements, actions and policies regarding his corrections portfolio?
The Honourable Andrew Little.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, yes.
Why, when he has taken numerous papers to Cabinet regarding Waikeria Prison, has his government not made a decision regarding Waikeria Prison?
Mr. Speaker.
A point of order, the Honourable Ian Lees-Galloway.
Mr. Speaker, on 4 occasions, the member Louise Upston queried the absence of a member. She knows she must not do that.
Well, I didn't pick it up. The Honourable Louise Upston is order. Order. Sorry, I should have stood up, and that might have stopped the Louise Upston from interjecting while I was ruling. The member is a senior member. She knows what the rules are. She must not do it, and she will not do it again. The Honourable Andrew Little.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to cause the Honourable Member David Bennett to have more exercise today, but I can't quite recall the detail of the question.
Thank you. We all have memory lapses in this House, apparently. Supplementary question. Why, when he has taken numerous papers to Cabinet regarding Waikeria Prison, has his government not made a decision regarding Waikeria Prison?
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, this government inherited the tail end of a decision from the previous government to invest $1 billion into a mega prison, and the new government sought to review the details of that proposal so that a good decision could be made about the long-term future of the prison.
Point of order, the Honourable David Bennett.
There's never been any mention of a mega prison in any government documents. That member is misleading the House with that comment.
Sorry, has the member got a point of order?
Yes, he's misleading the House.
No, the member will resume his seat, and he's going to make very clear which standing order or Speaker's ruling he's referring to, if he's going to take a point of order, because at the moment he sounds like he's trying to usurp my role, where I take responsibility for making sure that the answers are in order. And so far, this answer was certainly in order.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
A point of order, the Honourable David Bennett.
What is it? 380B, where the member mentioned mega prison. There has never been in any official document.
Goodness sake. The member will resume his seat. Does the member want to have another supplementary? Well, away you go.
Given that serious crime has increased by 4% in the last quarter, but the prison population has risen only by 2%, does he expect more or fewer serious criminal offenders to be imprisoned?
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, I think that member trivialises the reality of criminal offending statistics in this country because...
Order. The member will let the Minister finish the question. If he has a point of order by the end of it, I will hear him.
What the figures show is that over an extended period of time, a number of years, serious criminal offending has gone up. We know that there is serious pressure on the prison population, and this government, with its long-term objective of reducing the prison population, has to manage very carefully the short-term pressures on the prison system and the long-term wish to reform our criminal justice system so that it is safe and effective.
Point of order.
A point of order, the Honourable David Bennett.
I take offence when the Minister said that I trivialise these matters, and we'll ask him to withdraw and apologise.
You can, but I'm not going to require him to. Further supplementary?
Point of order. That surely, Mr Speaker, has to be a breach of Standing Order 120.
Why?
Referring to saying that a person is trivialising something as important as...
For goodness sake, I'm vaguely tempted to repeat Ron Mark's offence yesterday. Members need to be able to take a little bit of cut and thrust at question time, and being offended by saying that being offended by saying that someone is trivialising an issue is a level of sensitivity which any Member of Parliament should be able to handle. Matt King will withdraw and apologise. Sorry, Matt King will withdraw and apologise.
I've done nothing. I said nothing. I did nothing. I said nothing. What did I say?
Order.
Withdraw and apologise.
The member will resume his seat. The member interjected while I was on. Yes, the member did. I saw him. He was loud. I heard him. He mightn't have used words, but he certainly interrupted. Matt King. No, Matt King is going to withdraw and apologise.
Withdraw and apologise.
He made a very loud noise. He's not a small man, and he made a... Jerry Brownlee.
Mr Speaker, I'd like you to please reflect on the advice you just gave to the House about members being overly sensitive, because we've seen plenty of examples of that today.
Yes, and no, the member will resume his seat. What I'm saying is making noises which are not words in English, but noises that might be more commonly heard in a barnyard are not appropriate. David Bennett.
Point of order.
A point of order, the Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
How is effectively accusing a member of this House of making a barnyard noise not a personal reflection?
Well, I should probably have called it a loud guffaw of the type certainly not heard normally in this place. Supplementary question, David Bennett.
Why is he removing the performance measures of the number of prison escapes, the number of prisoner-on-prisoner assaults that are serious, the number of prisoner-on-staff assaults that are serious, from being made public, when this trivial and incompetent government is supposed to be an open and transparent government?
Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, that question requires a level of detail that is not foreshadowed in the primary question. I simply do not have that information.
Point of order.
A point of order, the Honourable David Bennett.
It was in the budget last week. That member cannot say that it's something that he does not know about. He signed off on that budget. He would have read it.
Order. The member will resume his seat. Question number 6, Timothy Coffey. Oh, sorry, Barbara Kurgis. Sorry, I didn't realise it further.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When will the Minister make a decision on Waikeria Prison to provide clarity for the Otorohanga and Waipa communities?
Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, we expect a decision in a matter of weeks, and specifically in relation to Waikeria. And I make no apology for the delay in making a decision, because it has been a difficult one, and it is a long-term one. And one reason for which we are not making the decision is, as the member who asked the question wanted, an economic development initiative by building another prison.
A point of order, the Honourable Jerry Brown.
When is the Honourable Paula Bennett able to come back into the House?
At a time I decide, and I will inform her when that is. Question number 6, Tamati Coffey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Research, Science and Innovation and asks, what initiatives in Budget 2018 will help drive more research and development, and why is it important that we lift our investment into R&D?
The Honourable Dr Megan Woods.
Mr Speaker, Budget 2018 includes the largest ever appropriation for research, science and innovation. This government understands that innovation is the driving force behind economic development. That's why we invested $1.1 billion of new funding over 4 years to support a more innovative economy and help raise R&D spending to 2% of GDP over 10 years. The government's most significant investment is in the R&D tax incentive, $1.02 billion over 4 years, which will incentivise faster growth in business R&D. This package, which includes 3 other initiatives, lays the foundations for an inclusive, adaptive and resilient economy underpinned by science and innovation.
Supplementary. Why is R&D as a percentage of GDP important, and how does this budget support the government's aim of achieving 2% over 10 years?
Mr Speaker, lifting New Zealand's R&D expenditure to 2% of GDP will drive the diversification of the economy by encouraging new industries and companies, new jobs and new ways of doing business. Based on our current modelling, Budget 2018 puts us on track to achieve 2% of GDP on R&D over the decade. But further public investment in the future will be needed if we are going to use research, science and innovation to transform the economy and solve our critical social and environmental challenges.
Supplementary. What are the details of the R&D tax incentive that she announced funding for?
Mr Speaker, the details of the tax incentive are still out for consultation. The government has proposed a rate of 12.5% for businesses spending over $100,000 per year. Consultation closes on Friday the 1st of June, and I encourage stakeholders from across the spectrum of research institutions, businesses and science to have their say on the design of the tax credit, including the rate, at what point it kicks in, and exactly how it is that we assist companies in pre-profit stage. We're aware that
Order, that's enough.
Okay.
Dr Pamjit Pamar.
To the Minister, what growth in R&D spending as percentage of GDP is expected to be seen through the R&D tax credit policy by 2020?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, we are on track to grow our expenditure over a decade to 2% of GDP on R&D. Currently, Mr Speaker, before the budget we sat at 1.3% expenditure. This budget has lifted that to 1.5%, which puts us on track over the decade to reach the 2% target, something the previous government did not do.
The question was about reaching to 2020, not in 10 years. So what is the percentage growth of R&D spending by 2020, not in 10 years?
Well, my view is that the question was certainly addressed. A supplementary question.
How can the sector have confidence in her policy if she is unable to give any such forecast for 2020?
Mr Speaker, the sector can have confidence because I've just received over $1 billion tax incentive to further incentivise spending on R&D. I did answer the member. The forecast is a lift to 1.5% expenditure of GDP over that period of time, something the previous government failed to address.
Question number 7, Chris Bishop.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. To the Minister of Police, does he agree with the Prime Minister who said we've put $300 million into police and over 900 new police officers as a result, and we've got another 2 years to finish it off? If so, why did his budget press release say that $298.8 million was over the next 4 years and there was a further $159.7 million in 2022-23?
The Honourable Stuart Nash.
Yes, I agree with the Prime Minister. The press release reflects Treasury's appropriations, which always stretch into the future.
Supplementary. Has he seen the comments from the Treasury that budgets were usually only set out for 4 years, but it appears that the Minister of Police's office wanted to highlight the point that the funding will increase further over time? And isn't that a confirmation the new police will be delivered over 5 years, not 3?
Mr. Speaker, no.
Supplementary. Why does his budget press release explicitly not say that the 1,800 police will be delivered over 3 years, and is the only budget press release out of 52 issued by the Executive to explicitly mention funding over 5 years?
No, order. I'm going to ask Mr Bishop to rephrase the beginning of his question, because I don't think it was quite... I don't think you can explicitly not say something.
Sorry, Mr Speaker, just repeat that.
Well, sorry, I am trying to help the member. I don't think that any press statement can explicitly not say something. It can not say something, but if it's explicit, it's got to be there, doesn't it?
I'll reword it, Mr Speaker.
Thank you.
Why does his budget press release not mention that the 1,800 police will be delivered over 3 years, and is the only budget press release out of 52 issued by the Executive to explicitly mention funding over 5 years?
Mr Speaker, I think I've said about 1 million times we're going to deliver 1,800 over 3 years, but what I would say is when a government increases the police service by 1,800 frontline over 3 years and 485 back office staff, support staff, we have to plan for an increase in operational costs.
Speaker, does he stand by his statement that the extra funding in 2022-23 is to account for police pay rises when public sector wage rounds are a specific tagged contingency separately accounted for in the budget?
It's an increase in operational costs. We're planning for the future, Mr Bishop.
Mr Speaker, does he realise that if his story is true and that the 2022-23 funding is for police pay rises, that works out to a pay increase of $88,000 for each of his new officers?
Mr Speaker, the interesting thing is that we're going to increase police by 1,800 to around about 10,500. We're not going to increase the pay of just those 1,800.
Question number 8, Jonathan Young.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Energy and Resources and asks, does she stand by all of her policies and actions in relation to the energy sector?
The Honourable Dr Megan Woods.
Mr Speaker, yes.
Have the initial findings of her review of petrol prices indicated that the biggest driver of fuel price increases will be the new petrol taxes imposed by Phil Twyford and Phil Goff?
Mr Speaker, in order to carry out the review into fuel margins, we require the Commerce Commission to have the powers to carry out market studies. We have completed that piece. We have started that piece of work by having that bill on the floor of this House. This, I note, was the same approach the previous government was going to take, only I'm very pleased to report we were able to get that legislation onto the floor of the House within the first 6 months of our term. We look forward to the Commerce Commission having those market study powers.
A point of order, Jerry Browning.
I'd make the point, Mr Speaker, that most of what the government did in its first 6 months was from the previous government's efforts.
Order. Order. No. The member knows that that's not a point of order. The member will stand, withdraw and apologise.
Withdraw and apologise. Point of order.
A point of order, the Honourable Jerry Brownlee.
Mr Speaker, if ministers are going to make outrageous claims like that, and we saw it from Grant Robertson today, effectively saying that everything that's good in the economy was to do with him, then surely we should be able to point out that they are just that, outrageous claims and nothing to do with them.
And this, again, the member knows absolutely, is not a point of order. And I'm sort of slightly loath to take things much further with the member at the moment, but I would ask the member, as one of the most senior members on that side of the House, one of the most senior members in the chamber, if he can help his team, because he has some memory of being in opposition, and the way questions, especially aggressive questions, are asked and answered from that side, if he could share that with them rather than providing an example which reminds me more of myself in the past than being positive. A point of order, the Honourable Jonathan.
Sir, I understand what the Minister is saying in terms of the Market Studies and the Commerce Commission bill going through the House at the moment, but my question was regarding the initial findings of her review, and the Minister did say at the end of last year that pending that legislation going through, that she had instructed MB to look at mechanisms by which she could address the price increases of petrol, and I believe that she has not addressed that.
Well, my view is that the member did address the question. If the member's not satisfied with the answer, he can ask further supplementaries.
I'll go on. What is she doing to ensure electricity costs will stay down when many commentators are saying that her 100% renewable goal will in fact drive them up?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The price of retail electricity is of vital concern to this government and in fact was part of our confidence in supply agreement with New Zealand. First, informing the government was to have a review into retail electricity prices. I'm pleased to report to that member that we have begun that review. The panel is in place, the terms of reference have been out and phase 1 is well underway. We are determined to look at what the drivers that are leading New Zealand to have some of the sharpest rises in retail electricity prices in the OECD over the last decade. But not only that, Mr Speaker, to look what the coming pressures of future technologies will be.
When she described ending new offshore permits was a planned, measured and careful transition towards renewable energy, did she actually tell anyone in the petroleum industry her plan to ban new offshore permits prior to the 12th of April?
Mr Speaker, this is a question that has been asked in this House and responded to in this House previously. What we have been very clear on is that both the Prime Minister and myself made very clear comments around the future of offshore drilling prior to the 12th of April. Indeed, 2 weeks before making that announcement, I went to the Petroleum Conference and gave a speech reassuring the sector that the changes coming would not affect their existing permits.
Very good.
Did she actually tell anyone in the petroleum industry prior to 12th of April that she was planning to ban new offshore permits?
Mr Speaker, as I just answered in the previous question, there were very strong signals. But Mr Speaker, we made an announcement. That was the point at which we told people in the petroleum sector. As that member knows, that members of the sector received phone calls from myself, several colleagues and officials the night before the announcement was made. And?
Supplementary question, the Honourable Shane Jones.
To the Minister. Can the Minister confirm that production in terms of gas in Taranaki has been in decline for over 8 years with absolutely no substantial or even small new discoveries?
Mr Speaker, yes I can. It has gone from a $300 million industry to a $10 million industry over the last few years. I also note there was no summer drilling activity for the last 2 previous summers. But the local member will probably be very pleased to hear that even after the government's announcement, over the next 18 to 36 months, there are over 20 wells planning to be drilled in the summer program.
Question number 9, Jamie Strange.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Education. What is the Coalition Government doing to help the education system to understand and respond to the impact of socio-economic disadvantage on student achievement?
The Honourable Chris Hipkins.
Mr Speaker, the Coalition Government is expanding the risk index announced by the previous government to be further developed as an equity index. The index does give valuable insights into the impact of disadvantage across early childhood education and schooling.
Order. Can the member resume seat? Louise Upston, the Honourable Louise Upston, will not interject further during this answer. She's a long way away, but she's drowning out the Minister. The Honourable Chris Hipkins.
Mr Speaker, the decision that the government has taken is to expand the new equity index beyond its narrow application as a tool to inform only an allocation of only 3% of school funding, so that it can also be used to inform improvements at a system level and other sources of school funding, so that we can ensure those students who have disadvantage are properly supported through the education system.
Supplementary. Will the equity index be used to replace school deciles?
Mr Speaker, school deciles will probably go eventually, but not immediately. The decision to remove school deciles and impose the new equity index, and to do so on a no-losers basis, meaning no schools lost funding, would have effectively meant that both systems would have to operate together. So decile funding would have continued to operate even if we had gone ahead with the implementation of the equity index in its previous form. I've been advised that the cost of doing that could be up to $100 million, none of which was previously budgeted.
Question number 10, Nukaraka.
My question is to the Minister of Māori Development and asks, is vote Māori Development for 2018-2019 lower than in the current year 2017-2018?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Willie Jackson.
On behalf of the Minister of Māori Development, no. Budget 18 vote Māori Development is not lower when things such as the one-off payment of $9 million to Parihaka is taken into account. That was one-off expenditure, and in fact, if you include contingency funds, the budget 18 is in fact higher. So well done, Minister Mahuta and the Māori Labour Caucus.
Order, order. I'm just going to remind the member that when he is answering this question, he is actually answering as Nanaia Mahuta, and I'm pretty sure that while the minister might be proud, she wouldn't address it in that way.
Supplementary. Does the total annual and permanent appropriations and multi-year appropriation forecasts show a reduction from $328,112,000 in 2017-2018 to $316,421,000 in 2018-2019?
Mr Speaker, no. The member has got his figures wrong.
Supplementary. Does she agree with John Tamahere, who said, quote, for the first time in decades, Budget 2018 took money away from Māori?
Mr Speaker, I'm not sure if she agrees with John Tamahere.
Order. Supplementary. Does she agree with John Tamahere, who said, quote, no amount of spin by Labour's 13-strong Māori caucus, 5 of whom are in the cabinet, can hide the fact that budget for Māori has been cut?
Speaker, can I say on behalf of the Minister that she does agree with John Tamahere on some things, but he's got it sadly wrong, and obviously, Mr Speaker, was on the whiskey when he was doing some of his graphs for the New Zealand Herald.
Order, order. No, that is a reflection on someone outside the House, and an inappropriate one, and the member will stand, withdraw and apologise.
Withdraw and apologise, Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Shane Jones.
To the Minister for Māori Development. Can the Minister confirm that elements of the Vote Māori Development will better prepare communities to gain access to the Billion Tree Strategy, the $3 billion Provincial Growth Fund focused on better land use outcomes, water storage, and the preparation?
Order.
Is it too long or was it too loud?
Yeah, the members had enough. Probably if it was in a... Who said that? Well, the member will withdraw and apologise.
I do withdraw and apologise.
Thank you. No, the question's been asked. We'll have an answer.
Sorry, you have an answer? Yes, thank you, Mr Speaker. I can confirm that Māori, on behalf of the Minister, that Māori in particular will benefit greatly off the $1 billion scheme that Minister Jones is appropriating. I can also add to that, Mr. Speaker, that Māori have never been